My experience came from being called to go on a mission trip, and some of my fellow missionaries are in the audience today, a group of us, all women from St. John the 23rd Church in Perrysburg, were moved, and you may recall the moment in 2014, the summer of 2014, when the news reports started showing hundreds and thousands of unaccompanied children crossing the border without parents or adults. And what I would like you to do as I go through my talk is I would like to ask you to imagine what it would be like if the journey that I'm talking about, that these individuals have gone through and are going through, was one of your children, one of your grandchildren, maybe you and a child, perhaps your whole family, or maybe you as a grandparent, the last vestige of the family and the homeland. Imagine yourself, because every one of you in this room are just like the people that we helped serve crossing into the country at the US border. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about their journey, but a lot about what happens when they come to the border and what they're looking for in the United States. Our journey took us to McAllen, Texas, and people say, why McAllen? Why McAllen, Texas? Anybody ever been to McAllen, Texas? All right, I know those of you that have volunteered or have visited have. But McAllen, Texas is a town of about 140,000 people, and it's right across the Rio Grande River from Reynosa, Mexico. And because of so many of the attempts to thwart the migration of people from Central America and Mexico, public transportation is not an option for these refugees that are trying to seek asylum, nor are standard routes of transportation. So Father Herb talked about the coyotes, the smugglers, and these unaccompanied children were actually placed into the hands of strangers. Families went into great debt to pay these coyotes tremendous amounts of money to smuggle their children because of the gang activity, because of the violence, because they were being recruited into gangs. At the age of 6 and 7, they were being recruited on the playgrounds of schools, they were being kidnapped, they were being placed into human trafficking. It was a horrific situation. I myself cannot imagine putting my child into the hands of a stranger and then not knowing if they would ever make it to safety. And within a few months of my time at the border, we started seeing families coming, in part because they were concerned about whether or not their children had made it. And when families were traveling together on this journey, and it's a very arduous journey, we're talking about being smuggled by coyotes in tanker trucks, in boxcars, in the back of semi-trailers during the day, and then stopping at a point and walking through the desert at night because it's cooler. No food, no water, no bathrooms. For some, the journey's 2 weeks. If they've got a really good coyote. For most, it was upwards of a month or more. One family that we served from Eritrea, Africa, took a year to get to the border. And these individuals are coming primarily from Central America. But for the there's been 100,000 refugees served at the immigration point in McAllen, Texas, through Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley in the Diocese of Brownsville. And of those 100,000 people, they have come from 38 countries around the world. So although we've been talking about the root causes of migration in Central America and Mexico as being a core of this movement, people have come from 38 countries, 5 different continents. We saw refugees coming from Asia, Africa, not only North America and South America, but Europe. And they were all seeking a safe haven from persecution in their home country, or the fear of future persecution. And there was discussion, and I could tell you that the stories are horrific, because these individuals face not only persecution in their home country, but they also face persecution on the journey north, from the coyotes, from gang activity, from organized crime, from human traffickers. There was domestic violence along the way. And none of these people have the means to get on a bus or an airplane and get to where they want to go so that they can live the American dream. It's not why they're coming. They're coming because they'd rather risk their lives trying to get to a safe haven than to stay in their home country and face what they perceive to be as certain death. Now, these 100,000 people that crossed the border and were helped at the Humanitarian Respite Center that I'm going to talk about in just a couple of minutes, all went through what I call extreme vetting, and people always want to know what's extreme vetting. When they cross onto U.S. soil, they're crossing the Rio Grande Valley. The Rio Grande River. And that river is the narrowest and shallowest in McAllen, Texas, right at Reynosa. So for people that can't swim, for people that are trying to get the most direct route to safety, they come through Reynosa, which happens to be an international port of entry, amazingly enough, and also the easiest place to cross. They cross through the river, they come out of the water, they immediately surrender to Border Patrol, and it's a very militarized state. Those of you that were there recall about every 20 yards you'd see a white Border Patrol vehicle. There are sensors all along the Rio Grande Valley that detects movement. They have Border Patrol agents hiding in the brush. None of these refugees are fighting or are creating problems in any way. They surrender because they want to seek asylum. They're taken to what's called the ice box. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has a very cold processing center, and it is a jail. These children were placed in rooms that were 10 by 12, concrete block rooms with no furniture, no blankets, no bathroom, a hole in the ground. 100 children in each of these processing rooms. Frantic. No parents, no support. And frankly, the Border Patrol was overwhelmed in the early 2014 summer days because they couldn't understand why all these children were coming. When the families started coming, it was determined that the men and the women would be separated from the children, and that still goes on today. The children would be under the custody of the mother, and the father was immediately deported. That created great consternation for the refugees that were coming through as well. Now people say, well, what we're hearing on the news is these are criminals, these are rapists, these are drug dealers, these are people coming through the country that are going to create problems here in the United States. And I can tell you that, like any police station, all of these people go through background checks. And while these individuals are in these individual processing centers, Border Patrol agents actually interview them. And they get the story. They build up case files. They're interviewed by not only one Border Patrol, but several Border Patrol agents. Then they compare the stories of the different people that are traveling together. And if there appears to be a credible threat of violence, They take the case files and then they move these people, children and parent, to another holding center that's also in McAllen, Texas, which I also had the opportunity to go inside. They don't allow you to take pictures of these facilities, but you may have heard. They're warehouse facilities that contain giant chain link kennels, if you will, for men and for women and children. There are no beds, no blankets. You get a Mylar sheet to throw over you. There are no bathrooms except a porta potty. And there are halogen lights on 24/7. There are no enrichment activities, no books, no toys, no music. It's an environment that I would find very difficult to be in for any degree of time. And for those of you that have lived in the South, one of the things I loved is Fabuloso, which is a cleaning product that smells just wonderfully, but there's no Fabuloso in this facility. It's an amazing place that these individuals stay in for upwards of 7 to 12 days, as then Homeland Security goes through the case files and determines whether or not these individuals have a credible threat story, okay? And the other criteria that they have to have is they have to have a sponsor here in the United States that will pay for them to travel to a specific site in this country, a specific site that they will be housed. And so what ends up happening is if they can prove a credible threat to Border Patrol agents and Homeland Security agents, and if they can also show that there's a sponsor in this country that's been vetted that will pay for their travel, they will be released with a temporary protection status, which means that they have papers to travel legally in this country. So the 100,000 refugees that we helped are not illegally in this country. They are legally given the protected status to travel to the United States and have their case heard. Unfortunately, though, they're kind of treated like criminals because all of the adults are given a GPS ankle monitoring device that must be charged. And one of our fears at the Humanitarian Respite Center in McAllen, Texas, was that these women traveling with young children were potential targets for human trafficking and violence in this country. And unfortunately, we don't have the checks and balances to keep track of the unaccompanied children that were separated from their parents that are in this country, nor do we really know the safety of those that have been allowed to travel. So they go through quite a bit of vetting. At the Humanitarian Respite Center where I served, along with the other women from St. John the 23rd, we offered what I would call the first humanitarian welcome into the United States. Everything that I've shared with you are behaviors that have been taking place in the United States, okay? But when they were dropped off at the bus station, these people, many of whom were from Guatemala that are Mayan, that cannot speak the language, were left to fend for themselves. Sister Norma Pimentel set up a respite center at the Sacred Heart Church, and we asked these individuals, would they like a shower? They haven't showered in weeks, months. Would they like a change of clothes? Maybe a new pair of shoes? A warm bowl of soup? They were not fed well in the processing centers. Apple and a dried sandwich is what they had for their meals. And really, it's because Border Patrol facilities are not set up to take care of people in a humanitarian way. But we live the gospel of Matthew 25. And for those of you that are inclined, I would ask you to read it, because we welcome the stranger in our midst with a bienvenidos, welcome. And I can tell you that there were days, I was one of 2 full-time staff at this respite center for 18 months. There were days that I was the only person, along with Eli Fernandez, welcoming our people in need. And I saw men break down and cry and fall to the floor and just kiss the ground. There were days when every member of the 200 individuals coming into the center hugged me. And, you know, I couldn't speak their language, but boy, when you make connection with someone eyeball to eyeball and you give someone a hug, there was a lot of compassionate care there and also a lot of love. And they helped make arrangements for travel. They helped these individuals learn the legal hoops they were going to have to go through. And it's a center that's still trying to help the refugees that are coming through right now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of tension at the border. There are about 7,000 troops now in McAllen, Texas. They have installed that circuline barbed wire all along the river, or they're trying to build a wall of it to keep people out. And they've also blocked the pedestrian paths to the international port of entry at the Hidalgo International Bridge, which is the quote-unquote legal and official point of entry for these refugees. So I would ask you to pray for everyone at the border right now. And I can only share with you that I have felt increasing anguish. I feel like my heart is still there at the border, and would ask your prayers for the troops and for the refugees that are just looking for a safe haven, wherever that might be. Thank you.